Happy New Year to anyone who catches this video tonight. New York City, Times Square, watching the ball drop. Are you going? Are you going to be there? Let me tell you what to expect before you get there. If you're traveling in maybe 100 miles or so just to have this one-time experience and you have any apprehension about being in the city or the traffic or the crowds, it's important to know that New York City is probably one of the safest places on the planet that you could be. If any of the younger people in my family, any of the teenagers were coming over to tell me that they're taking the train into New York and banging around in the touristy section in Manhattan for the day, I wouldn't even think twice about it compared to, say, if they were going to Providence and driving around out there. I would be like, well, what exactly are you going to do? What exactly is your plan for the day? But if someone says, no, I'm just going to go hang out with my friends in New York, very rarely do I even think twice and worry about it. New York City, within the last 20 years, has probably become one of the safest places on the planet. So, it's not safety maintenance wise. I mean, if you're taking an Uber, you still have your stranger danger. And if you are getting on the train, there's some sketchy spots on some of those rails that I would avoid personally. But if you're talking about just the random crowd and staying out of trouble and having your group of people having a great time, you're in a good spot if you're partying it down on New Year's night in New York City. However, there are a couple of things that might not occur to you if you're a person that's going into town and you want to have this one-time experience, because really all you know about Times Square is to make your way to that part of town at that time and just enjoy the experience and the people and the view, right? So let's talk about what happens when you get into Times Square, what you can expect, and what no one ever talks about. First, crowd control and safety. If New York City can do nothing else, they can do crowd control, and they can do it in a way where no one else speaks a common language or they don't necessarily need to communicate. It's just forced upon you. Now, it feels, as a person who's not used to like a really forceful, authoritarian type of environment, it feels really intrusive and it feels violating when a line of police show up. If you're from a small town, you're not used to seeing this. It feels really violating when a line of police show up and then they just push an entire crowd back and you're part of that crowd and there's no hostility, there's no, everybody's having a great time and it's just so forceful. And the truth is that this is a necessity, specifically if you want to keep people safe. And so this isn't personal. You should just do what you're told and you should be agreeable with the crowd and you should go to the place where you're supposed to be. One of the frustrations that happens is that the people who are managing the crowd are just doing what they're told. They don't necessarily know where you're supposed to be. They don't even know where you're supposed to be until the moment they're told to push a crowd out of the way. So what ends up happening is you have these pens in the streets, and people are going to be herded like cattle into these pens. And the reason for this is so that ambulances and police can get through the intersections, and pedestrians who are just shopping or need to get somewhere aren't crushed in a crowd, or they're not impeded from their travel so that they can get to their hotel or they can get out of the freezing sub-zero temperatures. As the hours go on in the night, people are going to start dropping off and changing their mind because it's just too harsh. The environment is too harsh to be standing out there for hours and hours. A lot of people will leave. And what ends up happening is those people need to safely get to the next place, or they need to get underground, or they need to get to their train. And that crowd control is an absolute necessity, because if New York City didn't handle it the way that they do, people would get hurt and people would possibly even die from exposure. And there are a few hairy moments in the moment when that crowd control is happening. It's relatively, mostly, very, very safe. But you can get in a pinch. You can get crushed in certain circumstances. And so you want to be able to avoid that if you are aware, if you know what to prepare for and you know what's happening, then you can kind of keep yourself out of like fighting the crowd or fighting the flow of where the crowd is supposed to go, because it's intuitive for people who've been out there for hours and hours to try to jockey themselves up the street and up the block so they can get a better view. And I'm here to tell you, I promise you, it does not matter how many blocks you get pushed back, you can see everything just fine. You can see, if you're pushed 20 blocks back throughout the course of the day because they're managing the crowd and they can't have this volume of people in the streets and you tend to get pushed back, you can see perfectly fine from 26th Street as you can from 14th Street. If you're down on 38th Street, you can still see the ball drop. You are not missing anything. You're just going to be put into a safer location. So here's what you can expect when this happens. It's not intuitive. You don't necessarily know where you're being pushed to. All you know is you're being pushed out of Times Square. And there are going to be an entire group, thousands of people, who have made their way up to the front, and they think they've got a really great position. But what ends up happening is they will open these pens on one side, and they'll only let a certain amount of people come into those pens from that one side. And it seems super unfair because you may have been there for noon, and then all of a sudden 2,000 people behind you started coming in at 5 or 6 o'clock, and you've been already standing there, and now you're not being pushed back to the next pen. You're just being told to clear the block, and nobody knows what that means. So when I was with my group of people, we had been there since 11 in the morning. Our noses were right underneath that ball, and we were standing with a group of people who had also been just as diligent about getting their really terrific spot. And none of us knew what to expect or why we were being pushed out of the entire intersection. And meanwhile, 2 blocks back, there are people that have kind of just filtered in right around the 5, 6 o'clock mark. It's January. It's already getting dark, and you're being sort of pushed out of the commercial touristy area, which can be intimidating if you're not a person from that area. If you don't know the streets, you kind of feel like if you need to stay where the people and the lights are in order to be safe. And no one in the crowd control is telling you how to get back into that area. So what you need to know is that when they start clearing the intersection, what you have to do is you have to, whichever side of the street you're on, you have to exit out and go back 1 block or 2 blocks, depending on where the crowd is going. At this time, the crowd doesn't know. There's no one who knows what's going on. So if you book it and you turn around and let's be clear, if you're in New York City, you're going to be hiking. I mean, wear your mountain climbing shoes, wear your layers, wear whatever you need to as if you were going camping overnight, because this is a place where you don't have a choice. You have to walk. I've been kicked out of taxi cabs because the driver doesn't want to drive 2 or 3 blocks because it's just not worth his time. And that 2 or 3 blocks is a 15-minute walk. You're hiking 3/4 of a mile because the city is just so massive. So be prepared that you're going to be walking, and you might cover 5 miles before the night's over, before you find a pen that you might get yourself into, because you've got to go around these blocks, and each one of these blocks is a good solid half-mile run. So we started off right at 14th Street, and I think I'm recalling from several years back, but I think we ended up around the 28, 26, 24 mark maybe. So we went a good solid 10, 12 blocks back, and we were still, if you were to look down the alley at the crowd of people, there were millions of people in front of us. And when you look behind us, I couldn't see the end of the street. It spread out for another 24 blocks of just millions of people just hanging out windows and in their pens, and it was an unbelievable sea of people. And so we were still in a perfectly fine spot. There was nothing to worry about. But we didn't know what was going on. We didn't know why we were being pushed out of the tourist-ish section. You're still in a pretty busy commercial area where there are plenty of stores, but you're out of like that strip with all the lights. So what you want to do is you want to exit 1 block, and you want to go back a block and see if you can't get back into that street, back into the pen that's going to be set up 1 block back. At this time, not everyone is going to quite get and understand what's going on, so you're not going to see people really trotting away really fast. They're just going to be kind of befuddled. And the other thing to understand is that you're in a place where people are coming from all over the world. There's a really good chance that nobody speaks English around you, or they don't speak your language. And if you even have some kind of a glint of a common language that you can kind of nudge somebody and smile and communicate, then that person next to them on the other side of them speaks a completely different language. So don't assume that they're going to be giving instructions, that if they were to be giving instructions in English, that the crowd is going to know what's going on, because you've got people from everywhere, and in that particular moment, all over the world, right there next to you. So what you want to do is you want to go around the block, you want to try to get back in. You're going to find yourself stuck a couple of times in groups of people who are just sort of being held on the sidewalks until they can decide which side of the pen they're going to open up. And then that one side of the street will be filtered in. And the other side of the street will be cleared and exited out of the intersection yet again. And then those people, they kind of disperse. The ones who figure out what's going on, are you're going to see them trotting away, and they're going to go down and they're going to go back up again. Now this all happens in the dark. This will start happening around 5 or 6 o'clock, based on my memory of when the pens started getting filled in. And it will continue to happen, and every single time you go down a block, you might want to go down 2 blocks, depending on how heavy that crowd was, because if the crowd was super, super thick 3 blocks back, you might not be able to even get into the intersection, and there's no chance you'll get into the pen. So you want to go back down maybe 4 or 5 or even 6 blocks. And then when the crowd is cleared out, don't assume you're getting into that pen just because you're the first one in the intersection. Within just a few minutes, the crowd is going to fill in again, and just because you're the guy that was there first means absolutely nothing. They're going to open those pen doors, and whoever they point at is where the crowd filter will start shuffling in, and it's really 100% luck of the draw. There's no special preference whatsoever. The main priority is following the instructions from their supervisors, making sure they do what they're told, and making sure everyone stays safe and those ambulances can get through the actual intersections. So that's the number one main priority, and they do a terrific job of this. But it's really depersonalized, and you don't really get any help. They're not there really to help you. They're there to just keep the overall environment safe, and they're there to be prepared for you should there be an actual emergency. So which I've been in other cities where Tampa comes to mind, where I've been in these situations of crowd control where they didn't take the preventative measures, and the police were more like Canadian Mounties, where they were just sort of there to tell you where the bathrooms were and how if you could ask directions, or you could, help you get into a nice coffee spot so that you could get out of the crowd, and that's great. And it was catering to the tourists, but at the end of the day, as my recollection is on this particular instance in Tampa, people were hurt really, really badly, and no one could get to them in time, and there were casualties for this particular crowd crushing. So that doesn't really happen in New York City, although there are a few moments that get a little sketchy. The only time it really gets sketchy is when people are fighting the instructions they're being told. So if you get a group of people that for whatever reason the crowd does not understand what is going on, or they just decide they're not going to listen and follow the rules, then you could get yourself into some trouble, because that's when the crushing and the pushing starts to happen. So it's very important to be diligent, and if you're going to have a good time, you need to listen to the police, and you need to follow the rules, and don't sit there and question or freaking talk back, or you'll have a miserable time if you try to bow up to a New York City policeman. It's just not fun, and they're not there to fight with you. They're there to keep you safe, but you have to listen, and you have to follow directions. And you also should really, really make sure that all your youngest people know that too, because in a rural environment, we kind of have a little bit more sort of liberty to be a little bit more personal and casual with our authorities, because you might know them, and there might be like elbow room around you to where you can have the room to do that, and your authorities might be a little bit, their decisions can be a little bit more subjective. It's not like that in a place where safety comes first and not your feelings. So it's really important, if you find yourself in these circumstances, that you listen and you do what you're told, because that is going to be the thing that makes you have a good time at the end of the night. When you get pushed back into these pens, eventually you're going to find one where you can comfortably walk into, and you'll have sort of permission to be there. One of the things that you might find upsetting is that once you're in that pen, you can't leave. They're not going to let you get out of there. You can't come and go as you please. You can't go shopping, and you're in there for hours and hours. You might be in proximity to a store that comes out and tries to get out hot chocolate, or they might try to sell you some coffee or something. You might not be in proximity to that. So be prepared that you come with whatever you need to get you through the night. If you need snacks, if you need food, don't assume that you're going to have access to that. You're in a place with millions of people who are supposed to be standing in place, and there's nowhere to go to the bathroom. If you bring children with you, make sure that they're covered from any potential exposure, and one of the things that was most upsetting was seeing people who weren't willing to let their kids get shelter when they needed to, when they hit a moment of exposure, like almost crisis, where they were really just sort of fading away. And the young people that I happened to be with were like just gung-ho about making sure that they got to where they wanted to, that they got to that midnight mark. And I remember saying, listen guys, if we were out there for 15, 16 hours, if you can't do it, no hard feelings. If you really, feel like you're freezing or if something's happening that where you need to take shelter, we can leave. We can leave at any given moment if anybody wants to throw in the hat, because safety comes first. And we can get underground, which means we would have to go back to the train or to the train station. It's the only place, if you're coming into the city, it's the only place that you're going to find, that you can guarantee that you'll find shelter, at least from the cold environment, from the wind, from any kind of rain. It's the only central place in New York that you could go that would guarantee you can get in, find yourself a bathroom, find yourself something to eat. None of the stores can really, you can't guarantee that you're going to have access to any of those stores. Some of those stores, although it's terrific for tourists, and they're banking and they're making their money, if it gets too funny with the crowds, they're going to start pushing everybody out. They might even lock their doors. Definitely they lock up the bathrooms. If you're a paying customer to one of these places, you can go in and they'll give you a token to use a bathroom, and then you can put your token into the door, and then that way you can use a bathroom from there, but you have to be a paying customer. So keep that in mind. There are no bathrooms set up anywhere that I recall. I don't know if that's been changed. It's been 4 or 5 years since we've been there, so I don't recall there being any bathrooms. So safety is a huge concern in a crowd like that, and the way you keep yourself safe is to be diligent about listening to instructions and following those instructions. It's important to know that nobody around you knows what's going on. There are no people, tourists or store owners. I mean, they kind of have an idea of what to expect if they've been there for a while, but the guy standing next to you is clueless. So if he gets pushed out of the intersection, he doesn't know that he's supposed to go back to find a pen to get into. I probably walked around for 3 hours. After we were first pushed out of the intersection, I probably walked around for about 3 hours asking policemen, where am I allowed to be? And, I don't want to break the rules, but at the same time, we came to do this and see this, so where am I supposed to go? And the answer I would always get is, I don't really know. I don't know what they're doing right now. I don't really know what's going on. We had to figure out that we had to go around the block and run and try to get into a pen and go around the block and run. And there were probably dozens of thousands of people who were just flat out thrown out of those intersections. And they just kind of wandered off, or they just kind of never made their way back in, or it took them 2 or 3 hours to figure out what was going on, and then they would find themselves 40 blocks back. Or they would go find a restaurant where they could watch it from TV. And that's disappointing if they came from Tokyo, or if they came from Germany, or if they came from, Canada to have this experience, because they didn't know what to expect, and there's no one there to explain it to you. So if you're going out to Times Square tonight, bundle up, wear your long johns, wear extra layers, know that you need to follow the rules and that the rules are put there in place to keep you safe and your family members. Pack some food, pack some snacks, bring extra money. And if you can negotiate your way into a bathroom now and again, be prepared to sit down and buy some hot chocolates in a store if you want to use the bathroom. Be prepared to be a purchaser. Just because you're standing on the street to watch the ball drop doesn't mean that you can show up and not spend some money in that area if you also want to be comfortable. There are so many groups of college kids that come into town, and nobody has any money with them because they just thought that they were going to be standing in the road for a couple hours taking pictures taking their selfies with the Big Apple behind them. And that's not exactly the way it works in that town. You don't go into New York City without less than $200 in your pocket just to get you through the day for a couple of meals. Otherwise, you will be tourist non gratis. And you don't really want to be that. You want to have a good time. Have fun tonight, guys.